So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So my title today is A New Day, and I am guessing you think I selected this title due to the events of last week, of our inauguration of a new president and a new vice president, of new beginnings, new hope, new possibilities, and that surely is a good fit. As a matter of fact, it's an excellent fit, but that wasn't the only thing. This title, A New Day, is appropriate for every Sunday, for every talk, because every day is a new day, and we so often forget that. As we move forward, I can't think of a better focus for us to keep that in mind, that every day is a new day. Or as Brother David Steindl-Rast put it, every moment is a new moment. It's a gift. So you might say to yourself, that is pretty obvious. This is not rocket science. However, if you're like me, what do you do every morning? You get up in the morning and you start your day by picking up the same bag of rocks that we carried around yesterday unconsciously and that we just set down the previous evening, without even taking a moment as we start each new day to realize the miracle of possibility and new beginnings that it represents. We are given such a gift every day, and we so often just miss it. We are going right now through times of such transition, individually and collectively. How much better would our coming weeks and months be, possibly, if we could approach them with that energy of new joy, new hope, and new possibilities? If we could see, as the Christian scriptures teach us, all things new. Isn't that a great energy to just listen to it? Seeing all things new. So you may be thinking, she sounds pretty naive. We live in a time of peril, pandemic, violence, division. Get real. This is not the time to be, you might be saying, a crazy optimist. But I suggest that it is. I think it was Thomas Friedman who said, pessimists are usually right and optimists are usually wrong. But all the great changes have been accomplished by optimists. Think about it. The world is changed by those who see hope and see possibilities and breakthroughs, where others only see barriers and breakdowns. My message today is an exploration of how we can leave room in the midst of all the detail, in the midst of all the stuff, for the possibilities ahead. How can we invite these possibilities into life with the joy and the expectancy in our own hearts? So my focus today is joy and new beginnings. As the ancient wisdom from the book of Psalms declares, this is the day that the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad. So I draw wisdom today from two extraordinarily joyful teachers. In April of 2015, the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu spent a week together in Dharamsala, the residence in exile of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in India. They had met before. They became fast friends. Each one calls the other my mischievous spiritual brother. You can just see pictures of these two together, and you can see the humor and the love and the mischief and the joy. These two men, one of whom, Archbishop Tutu, was ill with a resurgence of his cancer, and both of whom have lived through grief and tough times and tragedy, spoke of hope and joy, human nature, and the future. Author Douglas Abrams was there to record the event and the conversation as these two sages spoke, as he put it, in a quest to understand joy. His record of their conversations is the book I used as a resource. It's entitled The Book of Joy, and I recommend it. It's a wonderful book. They met for more than a week, and all the wisdom, stories, and humor that they shared fills much more than this brief talk. During the dialogues, they agreed on and discussed 8 pillars of joy. That's what I'm going to focus on. 4 pillars of the mind and 4 pillars of the heart. As we now focus on new beginnings and new possibilities, it seemed to me the right time to share this wisdom with you. The Dalai Lama said, one great question underlies our existence. What is the purpose of life? After much consideration, I believe that the purpose of life is to find happiness. So what is your reaction to his thought? The purpose of life is to find happiness. Did you think, how frivolous can that be? Don't we think the purpose of life is loftier? To find God, to serve others, to lift up humanity? Isn't it more than just being happy? Well, I think that phrase invites us to dig deeper. We so often misidentify the source of our happiness. We think more money, more stuff, more fame, more a new car, something like that, something we can get or earn will make us happy. And once we get that, it'll be fine. We don't realize that these things, our attachment to these things, is instead a source of our suffering. These two wise men and many other wisdom teachers show us that the life well lived is a source of happiness. A life of compassion and connection and service leads us to happiness and to joy. Now, I've used both those words, happiness and joy, and they each use a different term. Archbishop Tutu is going to use joy, while the Dalai Lama refers to happiness. For them, it's simply semantics. Archbishop Tutu says joy is much bigger than happiness. While happiness is often seen as being dependent on external circumstances, joy is not. But their discussions really show that they are speaking of the same quality. The Dalai Lama said, "The ultimate source of happiness is within us, not money, not power, not status." He goes on to say, "Some of my friends are billionaires, but they are very unhappy people. Power and money fail to bring inner peace. Outward attainment will not bring real inner joyfulness. We must look inside." So whether they're speaking of joy or happiness, they really, for them, are saying the same thing. Happiness is not the goal, it's the journey. As Archbishop Tutu said, joy it's really a byproduct. You cannot succeed by, as he put it, clenching your teeth with determination and setting out to find joy. You miss the bus. You must live in a way that opens you to joy. Now, this is easier said than done. I remember the story of the young child who was asked in school once to write down what she wanted to be when she grew up. She wrote down happy. Teachers told her she didn't understand the assignment, and she told them they didn't understand life. I love that story. So what, after a week of insights and stories and poking fun at each other and laughing together, did these two men agree was the secret of joy? They gave us what Abrams called the 8 pillars of joy, and that's what I want to talk about today. These qualities, if we can cultivate them, lead us to a more joyful life. They lead to that attitude that helps us live the truth that each new day is a gift. 4 are pillars of the mind, and 4 are pillars of the heart. So, before I give you these 8 pillars, before I tell you what the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Tutu thought were these 4 pillars, I'm going to stop talking for a minute to give you time to consider your own list. Right now, if you had to list the 8 pillars of joy for yourself, what would be on that list? Take a minute and write them down. And I invite you to keep it for Wednesday, because this is going to be the topic of our discussion. What are your 8 pillars of joy, or what do you think might be on their list? We're going to have some music and a little time for you to write down your list, and then we'll be back. Welcome back. Hang on to your list for Wednesday, and let's see how they compare to the lists by Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama. So, as I said, 4 of these pillars are of the mind. They are perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance. 4 are of the heart. They are forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. So let's focus first on the first four, the pillars of the mind. The first one is perspective. This is the ability to reframe the events of your life in a way that is uplifting and that leads you forward. As the Dalai Lama put it, for every event in life, there are many different angles. That's how he put it, many different angles. As you know, in his early years, he was like 15. He was forced to flee Tibet in the dead of night under very dangerous conditions and take up a life of exile in India. The Chinese killed or displaced thousands of his people. His life became very different from how he expected it would be as he lived in his palace at Lhasa in Tibet. But as the Dalai Lama spoke with Archbishop Tutu in these conversations, it became clear that he had reframed that. He valued not only what he had lost, but also what he had gained. Because of the events of his life, because of what had happened, including the tragedies, his world opened up. He was the first Dalai Lama ever to leave Tibet. He met thousands of people around the world he never would have met. He experienced different cultures. He met and befriended wise and wonderful men like Archbishop Desmond Tutu and other wise men and women. As he put it, we must look at any given situation or problem from the front and from the back, from the sides and from the top and the bottom, so from at least 6 different angles. This allows us to take a more complete and holistic view of reality, and if we do, our response will be more constructive. So perspective is listed first because it's a quality of the mind, and the mind is easier to change than the heart, than the emotions. We have more control over our mind. We have greater influence over our mind. We can become aware of our thoughts, and we can actively and affirmatively redirect them. The Dalai Lama's friend and interpreter Thupten Jinpa noted that perspective is nothing less than the skull key that opens all of the locks that imprison our happiness. This is why it was listed first. The first step, in other words, is to change how we see, how we think, to open our perspective. When confronting a tragedy, and these two men have confronted many, in addition to the trauma and the pain, what can we look at? We can look at the healing and the love and the hope that were also present. We can take the focus off ourselves and open our hearts to the experience of others. We can just broaden our view. We reframe to see more broadly beyond the elements that we initially focus on that cause us fear or pain. So where have we heard about this need for perspective before? We've heard about it from Brian Perry. Isn't this what he's talking about when he talks about his practice, where he will look at a situation and then he will ask, and what else is true? What is he doing? He's just looking at it from all different angles. Perspective opens us up to full awareness of a situation or an event, permitting us to see all aspects of it, removing our focus solely on our own self-interest. So, the next pillar is humility. Throughout their discussions, both of these men emphasized that they were ordinary people. The Dalai Lama, who is the spiritual leader of millions, the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva of compassion, calls himself a simple Buddhist monk. He has found that a sense of feeling special or superior is going to lead to nothing but isolation and loneliness. Now, humility often escapes us because we try so hard to puff ourselves up with all the things we have to reflect our own success, our own accomplishment, our own specialness. Archbishop Tutu is fond of telling the story of these 3 bishops who are standing before the altar just beating their breasts with great humility, saying how before God they were nothing. Shortly, one of the lowly acolytes in the church, much lower in the ranks, he approached and started beating his own chest, also proclaiming that he too was nothing. So when the 3 bishops heard him, one of them elbowed the other and said, "Look who thinks he's nothing." That is a funny story. So humility is one of the byproducts, if you will, of perspective. When we are able to appreciate the wider view, what do? We kind of boot ourselves off center stage. We realize that we are the same as so many millions of others, we realize how connected we are to others. As Archbishop Tutu put it, our vulnerabilities, our frailties, and our limitations are a reminder that we need one another. We are not created for independence or self-sufficiency, but for interdependence and mutual support. As Thich Nhat Hanh put it, we inter-are. So the next pillar is humor. So much of this book, these conversations between Archbishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama, were spent just laughing and joking, poking fun at each other. And they bring that gift of laughter and humor to their interactions with others. Laughter and fun and humor, they help us realize our common humanity. They diffuse tense situations and they bring people together. The Dalai Lama tells a story of a visit he took to Belfast in Northern Ireland after the Troubles. He was invited to attend a private meeting where perpetrators and victims were both present, and you could cut the tension with a knife. As the meeting began, a former Protestant militant spoke of how when he was growing up, he was told that whatever they did to Catholics was fine because Jesus was a Protestant, not a Catholic. So the Dalai Lama heard this, and he knew that Jesus was neither a Protestant or a Catholic, and he just started laughing. It completely changed the energy in the room. It gave the participants permission to be themselves, to interact together genuinely and honestly when they realized the absurdity of the prejudices that had driven them apart. The message here for both of these leaders is don't take yourself so seriously. It leads to self-importance. Humor brings us together. The fourth pillar of the mind is acceptance. At one point in the conversation, Archbishop Tutu asked the Dalai Lama why, given all the tragedies of his life, he was not morose. He answered with wisdom from the 8th century Buddhist master Shantideva, who wrote, "If something can be done about the situation, what need is there for dejection? And if nothing can be done about it, what use is there for being dejected?" So this is the same lesson we've heard so many times, isn't it? Think of the hula hoop. Focus on those things you can change and release the rest. That's acceptance. We accept our lives with their challenges, their successes, their imperfections. As our spiritual life deepens, we become more able to accept all that happens to us, the good and the bad, or as Archbishop Tutu put it, the warp and the woof of life. Don't think that acceptance is the same as resignation, because it's really not. It's far from it. Acceptance of reality does not add up to a confession that we are unable to change it. It simply means that we see what is there. This is how he put it. He says, we are meant to live in joy. This does not mean that life will be easy or painless. It means that we can turn our faces to the wind and accept that this is the storm we must pass through. We cannot succeed by denying what exists. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. What a powerful thought. Acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. Acceptance is the last pillar of the mind, and it leads to the first pillar of the heart, which is forgiveness. Archbishop Tutu spoke about his experience in South Africa, and we've spoken about that before here at One World, chairing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after the ending of apartheid. Story after story after story about the healing power of forgiveness, healing to the victim, to the abuser, and to the community. He writes, "Now I don't pretend that comes easily, but we do have a nobility of spirit." And here he's pointing to people in the room. You and you and you and you have the potential to be instruments of incredible compassion and forgiveness. We cannot say of anyone at all that they are totally unable to forgive. I think that all of us have the latent potential to be sorry for those others who are disfiguring their humanity in this way. Indeed, no one is incapable of forgiving, and no one is unforgivable. That's a premise of his book that he wrote with his daughter. It's called The Book of Forgiveness. We've spoken about it in the past, and it's tough, but the premise there, as he led us through his journey as the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is that no one is unforgivable. And the power of forgiveness for the one who is forgiving. That is the key. Not forgetting the action or abandoning the need for justice and compensation, but also not forgetting the humanity of the one who has perpetrated these atrocities. As Dutch Jew Etty Hillesum said in her interaction with the Nazis, she never stopped trying to see each human face beneath, as she put it, the ugly masks of war. And she did it because it enabled her to maintain her humanity, to defeat fear, to continue to love, even in the most desperate and frightening of circumstances. The next pillar of the heart is gratitude. So what is the Dalai Lama's practice here? Every day he wakes up with the thought, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. Gratitude for these two men is a way of life. It creates a vessel for wonder and joy. Again, when you think about this list of these 8 pillars, they are so connected. Gratitude arises from our ability to change perspective, to accept, even to forgive. As Mary Lou Palmer, who spoke a few weeks ago, reminded us, quoting Brother David Steindl-Rast, it is not happiness that makes us grateful, it is gratefulness that makes us happy. Brother David goes on to say that every moment is a gift. There is no certainty you will have another moment with all the opportunity it offers us. So to illustrate the power of forgiveness, Abrams, the author of the book, told the story of a man named Anthony Ray Hinton. Mr. Hinton was arrested in 1985 in Alabama for 2 murders he did not commit. If you saw the movie Just Mercy, he is the guy who was the cellmate of one of the main characters, Walter McMillan, and the lawyer in Just Mercy took Mr. Hinton's case, and ultimately he was released as well. So, convicted of the 2 murders, Hinton spent the next 28 years on death row in a 5 by 8 foot cell in solitary confinement except for 1 hour a day. He became a counselor and a friend to other death row inmates and to prison guards, many of whom advocated for his release. The Supreme Court ultimately unanimously ordered his release, and he was later interviewed on 60 Minutes, and he said that he was not angry and that he had forgiven. The interviewer was stunned and asked him, "But they took 30 years of your life. How can you not be angry?" He responded, "If I'm angry and unforgiving, they will have taken the rest of my life." He chose to forgive. He chose to be happy. In the quest for joy, forgiveness is a necessary step. The next pillar of the heart is compassion. Both these wisdom teachers tell us of the centrality of compassion in living a life of joy. The Dalai Lama teaches, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Now, compassion is not pity. It is opening your heart to others in a way that leads to acts of kindness, generosity, and comfort. This concern for others arises from the truth that we are all connected. We know it. We know that we are all interdependent. As Archbishop Tutu puts it, we are wired to be other-regarding. We are happier when we are focused on others. You probably know this from your own life. It gives you a lightness and a joy when you can take the focus off yourself and focus on the needs of others. So Abrams goes back when he's talking about compassion to the life of Anthony Hinton, sharing that he spent the first 2 years of his confinement angry and heartbroken. He refused to speak or respond to others. Then one night he heard the inmate in the cell next to him crying. He said, "The love and compassion I received from my mother spoke through me." I love that. And asked him what the matter was. He found out that the other guy's mother had died, and he comforted him. He even told him a joke and made him laugh. It was a transformational moment for Hinton. He said, "Suddenly, my voice and my sense of humor came back. For 26 long years after that night, I tried to focus on other people's problems, and every day I did, I would get to the end of the day and realize I had not focused on my own. Compassion is a foundational principle of the world's enduring faith traditions. It's articulated in each as a version of the Golden Rule. The last pillar of joy is generosity. It's a natural outgrowth of compassion. This is also a fundamental principle of the world's faith traditions. It is called zakat in the fifth pillar of Islam. Generosity strengthens our relationships. It reflects our interconnectedness. As Abrams put it, money can buy you happiness as long as you spend it on other people. So we can be generous with our time, our gifts, our hearts as well. Members of this One World community know very well the healing and the joy that comes from the many ways we can be generous with each other and with our community. So these are the 8 pillars of joy: perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. And I have spent such a brief moment on each of them. In the coming year, we're going to speak more about these qualities. We have an entire month devoted to joy. However, for right now, let's begin this new year with this energy of joy, possibility, and opportunity, realizing that every day, whatever happens, every day is a new day.